We had engagement with over 100 individuals who were part of listening sessions where they were compensated for their time because it's not their job to participate. And we wanted to make sure that they were compensated for sharing their expertise in their own communities.
I'm Carolyn Parrs, clean tech communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a just transition to a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. If affordable, reliable, clean energy that benefits everyone is important to you, you're in the right place, my friend. We have the power to make that happen, and that's what's happening each week on the Just Power podcast. Welcome, friends, to Just Power. Today, we are going to be talking about LA100. It is a 2-year study that analyzed how Los Angeles can get to 100% clean energy without leaving anyone behind. And for those of us that are in the energy world, we know that last 20% is the tough part, right? Even the most astute engineers are working on really hard on that. So that challenge, however, did not stop Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. They are the largest municipality in the United States with over 4 million residents. And to figure this out, they coupled and teamed with the National Renewable Energy Lab, otherwise known as NREL, to do a study. And this study revealed that it is possible to go 100% renewable in as early as 2035. And we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one. But probably the most significant part of this study was how they did it, that they involved very deeply and very extensively their community in planning. So that's the whole energy equity side that we're going to be diving in today. I have with me today Megan Day, who is the Senior Energy Planner at NREL, and Greg Reed, who's the Director of Water Engineering and Technical Service now, but formerly worked on the equity side during the study. So welcome both of you to this podcast today.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good to be here.
Thank you, Carolyn. Happy to be here with you today.
All right. Greg, we're going to start with you. Give us a little background on this bold vision and how it even came to be.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, we partnered LA Department of Water and Power with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, to identify ways to achieve our 100% clean energy goals in a more accelerated fashion by 2035. And so that work culminated in 2021, indicating that there are strategic ways to do so. However, there was a recognition that some of our most vulnerable customers may be impacted by that clean energy transition, and in various ways, from cost perspective in terms of affordability, in terms of access to clean energy technology, and being able to fully enjoy the benefits of our clean energy transition. And so our board of commissioners at Water and Power recognized the need to look at strategies on how we might move forward without harming our most vulnerable customers. So the 2-year study that you referred to was commissioned in 2021. And so LADWP continued to work closely with NREL, also with UCLA, who also joined the study partway through to do this work. And what your opening statement indicates is the important component of partnering with our vulnerable community representatives on exactly that work. So I came on board towards the tail end of the 2-year study from 2021 to 2023 as the work was culminating. And what I found to be most remarkable about the work was exactly that. We literally have 14 community-based organizations who are not your more prominent environmental advocacy organizations, who are at the table with our decision makers, both at the board level as well as our very smart engineers, who were looking at these very tough issues of clean energy transition and the harms and burdens that many of our vulnerable communities face. And so the fact that we have representatives from Black and Brown and Asian underrepresented low income communities at the table with our
Yes.
decision makers was the most
Yes.
remarkable part of what I found when I came on board in 2023. So, with that being said, the work culminated in publishing the report in November of 2023. And we now are in a transition period of taking the findings and the recommendations. And let me not call it recommendations. There are various methodologies that the department can consider in how we move forward with clean energy transition. So, just in a high level summary, it started with very ambitious goals to achieve clean energy by 2035, 10 years ahead of the state mandate,
Nice.
recognizing that there's some potential harm to vulnerable communities, and then seeking ways to address those harms in the way we move forward with clean energy.
That's amazing. I mean, to have the people that are burdened the most at the table with the decision makers, you said, right? And when you say that, do you mean the engineers that have to figure out something on where to put that substation, or do you mean, the mayor? Like, who else was at that table? Because this is, in all my years in the energy space, I've never heard that kind of integration of community voices. That's why I was so excited to have you on today. So could you just elaborate a little bit about what that table looked like?
Absolutely. So, with that being said, it started with the highest levels of our organization here at DWP, which includes our water and power commissioners. So these are appointed leaders of our board by the mayor who govern the department. And
Right.
so two of our board members really led the work with this study in partnership with our general manager and in partnership with the power system engineers. And so, with that being said, there was a structure established, starting with the the representatives of our burdened communities. We called it the Equity Strategy Steering Committee. So that was the
Nice.
14 community-based organizations who met with our research team, so NREL and UCLA, on a monthly basis. Our board president at the time, Cynthia McLean Hill, was on point working with the team and interfacing with the community-based organizations to hear their voices and to allow for that very top level leadership to be felt and to be present within all of the work. Our engineers responded very strongly in the way they were shaping the various programs. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that, as our conversation continues.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, the steering committee was the 14 community-based organizations. They were complemented by an advisory group of council representatives, because we at LA also have our council districts that represent various parts of the city. And then the mayor's office was also in that advisory group. And then some of our public agencies who have relevance in the clean energy space also participated on that advisory group. And so the center point being the vulnerable community representatives, surrounded by the industry experts and the governing stakeholders, and then complemented with our research leaders from NREL and UCLA, and the leadership from the very top of our organization, the board of commissioners, and our general manager.
I have one more question on top of this, and I'm getting to you, Megan, next. But because this comes up all the time when we talk equity with technology, is that we need to decarb tomorrow. Like, it has to happen tomorrow. We don't have enough time to go through all these processes, right? Because we just need to get that clean energy on the grid now. How did you do that and are doing that? Is that a fallacy? Or is that something you really have to bake into the process so it moves along?
So moving forward, in a platform that allows for those voices to be heard, while at the same time continuing progress, certainly should be in the capability of all of our utilities.
Okay, love that. Megan was very involved, right, in some of these processes. And I have a question here, Megan. We're going to get into some of the findings that NREL presented. But before we do, when I was diving in myself, I looked at the methodology, right? And you have community guided modeling and analysis that took place. What does that mean? And what did it entail?
Sure. Great question, Carolyn. And it's also a lot of what we're working on at NREL is community engaged research and analysis. And how do we make sure that we're not just all going off and doing our own research without it being relevant to the communities that we're serving, to the states, to the governments, to the federal agencies, et cetera, that NREL works with. So yes, it was community guided in the way that Greg described. We had this steering committee that kicked off at the early parts of this project and met monthly to prioritize which approaches we were going to take, which technologies we would focus on, which areas we would prioritize for our modeling and analysis, and throughout, including developing those strategies that would address some of the findings that we identified as areas of inequity that could be addressed by actions by the utility, the city, and some of these organizations in partnership. So yes, the steering committee was a big part of that, but we also had a process where we engaged with the steering committee members, the community-based organizations. And so we applied some social science here too. So we had that steering committee, but we also had engagement with over 100 individuals who were part of listening sessions where they were compensated for their time because it's not their job to participate. And we wanted to make sure that they were compensated for sharing their expertise in their own communities. They were individuals who were constituents of these community-based organizations. So we had listening sessions with social scientists to elicit, okay, what are some of your challenges and barriers right now in clean energy? What are your ideas for, ways that this transition could be more equitable and inclusive and share more broadly in those benefits and burdens of the transition? So that was also a key part of how we engaged with community members, primarily communities of low income, communities of color, to make sure that their ideas were part of this strategy development.
Was there any surprises that you learned when you had the listening groups, right? Individuals, right, that are really living this and that they shared what's really happening in their lives? Were there any surprises that?
Oh yeah, multiple surprises. One of the things that really, sure. One of the things that surfaced out of that elicitation process was that there was a strong interest in expanding who is eligible for programs that are primarily focused on very low income to moderate income households, because a lot of folks are struggling and they don't quite qualify for those programs, but they still can't make the investment to adopt solar or EV or participate in other kind of efficiency programs. So that was a key finding, and it's a sort of not a surprise, but a key feedback that was important to this, strategy development. We also heard that equity can mean using more energy for low-income households to, have safe and comfortable home temperatures, for example. That oftentimes there is a restriction in use of energy because of affordability or because of technical challenges. And so that is part of equity for many of these households is I want to be able to have a safe and comfortable home temperature. Yes. And so that was a big part of it as well. And a sense that folks want to be involved in the solutions and have a lot to contribute, for sure. That was not a surprise, but it was definitely a confirmation of the ability of, folks who are struggling with energy bills to be a part of the solutions to make it more affordable and equitable moving forward.
Got it. Let's take a look at some of these findings since we're talking about surprises. I was surprised by one about the trucks, right? That especially the big trucks, the fire engines, and the ones that haul lots of cargo are to be electrified, right? And by having them electrified, right, they actually, regular trucks have more energy emissions than this is what I read, that than some of the power plants, right, collectively. I was like, that was a shocker to me. And is that something that's being taken a look at, especially in those communities, right, that are low income and or part of indigenous communities or people of color? So has LA taken a look at changing their fleets, right, or even making helping more of businesses with EVs?
So, would you like for me to start, Megan? Because I know we could talk about what the study found and then the actions that are being taken. Uh, well, since I'm speaking, let me go ahead and take a stab at what I understand the findings had shown are exactly what you said, Carolyn. We found that the heavy duty trucks and the heavy duty trucks, although are a small percentage of the overall traffic that is in the city or in our region, generates by far the greatest amount of pollutants, NOx pollutants that impact communities who exist close to those transportation corridors. And those same communities happen to be our most vulnerable, burdened communities that may have the challenges that we're talking about today. And so, with that being said, when we talk about enjoying the benefits of a clean energy transition, we have a huge opportunity to incentivize and make happen that transition because that'll accrue benefits to those same communities that experience those pollutants because of their proximity to those transportation corridors. So, with that being said, it's a huge challenge, right? Because this is
Yeah.
something that isn't necessarily sits entirely on the shoulders of the Department of Water and Power. However, we are doing what we can to stimulate and incentivize that transition for the companies who do that hauling, who bring in the important goods that we consume every day here in the Los Angeles region. So we have rate structures and incentive programs that are designed to provide a return on investment to those companies who may decide to implement fast DC chargers at their facilities. And so that way they can begin to transition their fleet and have an energy source that can offset the cost of making those transitions. So that's a really a key strategy for us. We're also partnering closely with our peer agencies here in the region. For example, LA Metro, who has the responsibility of our public transportation, the Port of Los Angeles. Certainly, that's where a lot of our goods come into the region, and doing what we can to help those agencies electrify their systems and their fleets as well. We here at LA Department of Water and Power are also taking a leadership by example posture as well as we transition some of our fleet to electric as well. We also recognize that green hydrogen will help us achieve clean energy for those hard to electrify transportation facilities like our shipping and other facets of our transportation sector. So it's an all of the above approach. And we're doing our best to partner with all of our entities to ensure that we can accrue those benefits for our vulnerable communities.
How has the business community responded to this, to the incentives? And I know these things take a while to happen, right, and get integrated. So, but do you have any players that are just jumped on board and say, "Yay"? LA, we're
And
with
this is
you.
going to be where I have to admit, I don't have the detailed
Okay.
data to share with you. That's where our program managers will be able to provide a lot more information. So maybe that's a kind of we could circle back and provide some stats that you can,
Sure.
integrate into the presentation here.
Yes, how about we'll put those in the show notes for people, right?
There we
I'll
go.
circle back with you on that.
Yeah.
Megan, you touched a little bit on and I'm looking at one of these findings, and it says this: as the climate changes, universal access to home cooling will save lives. So you modeled on like what is comfortable, right? A comfortable and safe home. And some of the people that you interviewed were saying, wow, we can't, it costs money to have a safe and comfortable home, and that's why we don't do it, right? So tell me a little bit about that piece, right? And and you use language like saving lives, right? So tell me more about that piece, and then we can Greg, you can chime in as well.
Sure. So NREL actually modeled from a baseline situation through 2035, when LADWP is targeting this clean energy to clean electricity transition. We modeled 50,000 representative households across the spectrum of household characteristics in LA, and we modeled indoor temperatures in response to an outage situation as well as just a heat wave with the power on. And we found that in the baseline situation, there was a really surprising number of households, low-income households, who either did not have, about 30% did not have air conditioning, and up to 50% did not use air conditioning because of the cost, even if they did have it. So that's a really high number of people who currently do not have access to cooling, either because of the cost or the lack of technology or equipment. And so by 2035, with that changing climate, that we found over 230,000 households would experience a combined number of days and hours that exceeded 2 months of exposure to dangerous indoor temperatures. That's 86 degrees or above, where it's hard to keep the body sort of cool and safe and comfortable in those temperatures. So that does become a matter of life and death. Heat is the biggest killer among disasters and climate, extremes. And so there's certainly that threat to livelihoods, and the biggest impact there could be some direct install of heat pump cooling. There can be high upfront installation costs, but it has lower operating costs, so that folks can afford to keep the cooling on in those situations, right?
Yeah.
So that was a major finding, and it is a matter of lives.
Yeah.
And this is probably a good example of, engaging our communities while we continue with equity work in our programs. And so with that being said, we have a couple programs that have been developed and continue in parallel with the equity strategy study, that the 2-year study, and while we pivot to implementation. And so the first one I'll mention is our Cool LA program. And so this is a program that provides rebates to our customers, all of our customers, for various cooling solutions, recognizing that this is a burden that many of our communities face, whether they're low income or not. Focusing specifically on our low income, we have a rebate program that occurs at the point of sale, so that the customers do not have to come out of pocket to purchase air conditioning systems. And so it's a $225 rebate per unit, and it helps them get affordable access to cooling. We're looking to do more, and the second program that I'm going to talk about is positioning us to do a lot more. And this is our comprehensive, affordable, multifamily retrofit program. I know that's a mouthful. We call it CAMR for short, CAMR. And so our CAMR program provides that direct install opportunity. I'm sorry, let me not use the term direct install, because this is actually where we provide an incentive to our property owners of multifamily dwellings so that they then can hire a contractor to go in and provide various improvements to the dwelling units. So it's building envelope efficiency, making sure that the occupancy does not leak in terms of cool temperature or warm temperature. So making sure that building envelope is efficient. It also provides for energy efficient devices such as the lighting units inside the dwelling unit. It also helps with the decarbonization, so changing out appliances from gas powered cooktops and stoves to electric appliances, as well as in-unit washing and things like that. And so there's a number of decarbonization that's occurring as well. But then to this question, also implementing air conditioning systems so that the dwelling unit can have that safe and efficient cooling to withstand the heat episodes that we have here in the Los Angeles area. So being able to implement heat pumps, which is a more efficient form of cooling than your traditional AC units, is possible through our camera program. And so what this does is it provides the opportunity for our multifamily residents who often are low income to get solutions that are at no cost to themselves. And it provides an incentive for landlords to participate and upgrade those units to the benefit of their tenants. There also is a concern that has been expressed by our community-based organizations that we want to make sure that our good work doesn't have unintended consequences. And that may be where a landlord may upgrade their facilities through these programs. And then guess what? We now can raise the rent because these units are more valuable. Well, our agreements and our incentive programs preclude additional increases above and beyond what may be restricted in the affordable and rent control ordinances that that particular facility may be under. And so the issue of tenant displacements or tenant impacts are something that we want to discourage. And so we have language in our incentive programs to ensure that the tenant protections are there as well. So this is really huge because the study found that the multifamily dwelling units tend to attract more heat. And so the customers who are in those conditions are more vulnerable. And we anticipate upwards of 230,000 residents experiencing unsafe indoor temperatures for 2 months out of the year by 2035. So we're trying to respond in a very strong manner, and our camera program does just that.
So, Greg, you said at the beginning of this about the ongoing community engagement through this whole process, right? That is the part I'd like to focus in on. And I know that Megan, the study had that going on all through it. Is that correct? With the steering committees and so forth. So this piece is being weaved into implementation as well.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay.
So where we are today is pivoting from the 2-year study that was published in November to developing our strategic action plan around equity. And we have a continued engagement by the same 14 community-based organizations who are weighing in and providing feedback on what we are developing. And so
all along the way, this is happening with all of the different programs. Do they weigh in?
They continue to weigh in. Yes, correct. So with that being said, our mandate, and this goes from our board of water and power commissioners to our chief executive officer, Janice Quinones, to our mayor, Karen Bass, and producing an action plan for equity around our clean energy transition. And so we're looking at what we are going to do around housing. I mentioned the camera program as one strong example of what the equity work that we're doing, and setting a clear vision of what we expect to achieve within the next 5 years. Also, what we are doing in the transportation space. You mentioned the heavy duty trucking, and we just talked about that a moment ago. But we also are doing some work in the area of personal transportation as well. And so this action plan will lay out what those goals are and how we seek to achieve it in the transportation space. We also are looking at grid reliability. And so when we talk about grid reliability, part of what the community expressed is ensuring that we have resilient communities. And grid reliability is certainly a part of that. And so our planners are implementing strategies to ensure that our vulnerable communities do not get left behind as we seek to upgrade and improve our power system distribution, our power distribution systems. We also are looking at jobs. And when we talk about the equity outcomes that our community shared, they focused on 5 key priorities: affordability, access to clean energy technology, public health and community resiliency, jobs, and then inclusivity in the process. And so we have a very huge opportunity when we are making upwards of $60 to $90 billion of investments in clean energy to make sure that the workforce piece also provides equitable opportunity for our most vulnerable communities. So we have our labor partners, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW Local 18, partnering with our department, and potentially a broader platform with non-government, our nonprofit organizations who also work in the workforce development space, to create a platform that brings communities in who may not be aware of what we're working towards, to make them aware, to inspire them, and to ultimately get on a pathway to pursue what are very high-paying jobs and potentially unionized work. So this action plan, what we're setting out to do is to lay out the components of our implementation, take that to our community-based organizations in the beginning of the year to share with their constituencies, to get input from our most vulnerable customers, and then take that to our board for approval in the first half of next year. Once we have that plan in place, then that'll provide the goal setting and the transparency around our performance to achieve the desired results that everyone wants to see happen.
Got it. I love that the result has baked in it it seems like the 3 tenets of energy justice. And that started with NREL. As I recall, that was right in your processes, Megan, that all of the solutions, right, had a lens of justice in it, right? So could you just tell us a little bit about what those 3 justices are, or tenets of 3 justices are, and how you did that?
Sure. It actually started way back with our actual proposal for this work. We didn't want to say this is exactly what we're going to do, because that's us at NREL dictating how this should happen. And so we left a big gap in the specifics, right, of the actual, analyses, so that we could wait till we had that community guidance to focus on, what are the priorities of those most vulnerable communities, as Greg described. So it started way back before we were even launching the project, in how we scoped it out and framed it. So the 3 tenets that we focused on were, first, this recognition justice, which is really looking at and recognizing the historic and current inequities in whether it be the built environment. Some communities are experiencing higher temperatures in heat waves because of urban heat islands. That might be because of disinvestment or, disinvestment or underinvestment or lack of access to capital. It could be a leftover legacy from redlining, and which communities had access to capital to upgrade their homes and make them more efficient and effective, right, in withstanding high temperatures. So that's one piece of it. The other aspect is who's been involved in the process and making these decisions all along. So that recognition justice about understanding and addressing those past and current inequities. And then the next would be that procedural justice, right? Who is at the decision-making table? Is it the regular suspects, or as we try to frame this in partnership with LADWP, bringing some of those underserved communities who weren't necessarily heard? Right. And that's where that focus on, affordability came through. There are some entities who have been at the table who don't really focus on affordability.
That's right.
But for lower income communities, that was really number one priority in this transition is affordability. So process in terms of inclusion and equity and who is making decisions, who is at the table, and who is helping to design programs and initiatives that are intended to support more equitable processes and programs moving forward. So that was the procedural justice piece. And we tried to reflect that with the steering committee all along in these listening sessions. And then the final piece that we focused on was distributional justice. So that's where a lot of the modeling and analysis came in to understand who is benefiting currently from clean energy programs and incentives, and then what would that look like moving forward under different scenarios and approaches to distributing the benefits and the burdens of that clean energy transition more equitably.
Right. You really thought about this. I love this. This should be like a model that can be perhaps even used for smaller cities or utilities, right, in rural places, for example, right, and to be able to scale it on that level. I hope that it will be inspiration for others. I'm going to ask you in closing, can you both give me like one good piece of advice that you would tell let's just say a city or a utility about taking the journey, like on this journey of energy equity, right? What would be that piece of advice that you would give them as they start this process?
Should I go first then?
Sure, Megan.
Greg should have the last word on this one. So, NREL brings the modeling and analysis and this community engagement in terms of social science and really capturing and coalescing what we heard from those communities. And I think that's the biggest part, right? Is to engage underserved, lower income communities of color, folks from a broad range of those stakeholder groups in the decision making, in the prioritization, and refrain from whether it be your engineers or your leadership or anyone else from making those decisions for others, right? For those who are struggling to pay their energy bills, really engaging them because they are interested in this clean energy transition, in the equity and benefiting and participating in it and helping it succeed. So really engaging those and make sure that you develop equity metrics, right? So that you can measure where you are and where you want to go in ways that reflect those priorities of those underserved communities.
Yeah. Are there metrics on impact out there like it's been implemented, and how is this really, what kind of impact, making sure there's not undue energy burden? And we talked a little about that. So there are ways to do that.
Well, Greg can speak about, moving forward, they're really working hard on that. We had a set of equity metrics that we measured, a broad range of ways that we measured different equity, in different scenarios moving into the future, whether it be energy bill affordability, what percent of household income is spent on energy bills, how many hours at minimum wage might be needed to work in order to afford those energy bills.
Right. Wow.
So those are examples of affordability, grid stress, and how that breaks down across disadvantaged versus advantaged communities, and EV adoption, bill savings from solar. We really focused on that affordability part. Not just like, do I have solar on my roof? No. Do I have access to bill savings from solar wherever it is? So those are the kind of metrics that we focused on in our analysis. But Greg's been working on this a lot.
So Greg, first, best piece of advice that you could offer a utility or a city.
Yeah,
well, how they can begin.
Yeah, I would say that there's quite a bit that we've covered in our conversation today, and perhaps a particular utility representative might feel somewhat overwhelmed by all that should and can be done. But I would say, don't feel overwhelmed. Just start where you are. And that simple engagement with your community representatives can help to identify what's most important to those set of customers who have the greatest burden. Once you know that, then you can start to co-develop solutions that could then be brought forward to your governing body for implementation. And start where you are. Perhaps you can do a pilot scale implementation to get some quick wins. There could be a very strong branding opportunity to promote what you're doing and really gain traction with your larger set of customer stakeholder groups. But I think starting where you are and having that engagement with your customer base on what is most important to your consumers, and how can our utilities as anchor institutions do more to help those who can ill afford to pay more.
Right. Beautifully said. I love that. What's most important to you? Right. That's the question to that group. And begin where you are, even if it's a pilot, right? To get your feet wet in this. So thank you so much for both of you coming on today and sharing this fascinating study and this model going forward. Equity is more important than ever, right? In the clean energy transition, because if it's not benefiting everyone, then why do this, right? So it's so important. So thank you. How do people find out more about the report? I'll have some of the videos linked in the show notes and the websites. How would they get to LADWP and NREL on this?
You can just Google LADWP, or you can Google LA100 equity strategies. You'll get to the website. We've got all of the findings, all of the reports, but also some interactive websites, maps and charts to help folks explore what the different scenarios showed about those equity metrics and what are opportunities and strategies that came out of this whole process to increase equity in that transition. So lots of fun stuff to dig into and play around with on that site.
Right. And I would say
Greg, you also have this.
LADWP.com is our homepage, and we do have a search function, and typing in LA100 equity strategies should take you to our landing page so that you can access the study and the various materials that we have available.
Okay. Thank you so much again for joining us today on Just Power. And remember, everyone, we're all in this together. And equity, the lens of equity, is one of the most important parts. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.
The Just Power podcast is brought to you by New Mexico State University and Mind Over Markets, helping clean energy, clean tech, and regenerative businesses craft clear and compelling messaging that scales. Want to continue this conversation with Carolyn? Follow her on LinkedIn and follow the Just Power podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. And for more intriguing conversations, follow New Mexico State University's microlearning social pages on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube.